Okay, last chapter for my macro people. The Keynesian transmission mechanism, make sure you understand what that is. All right, we have basically two markets. All right, you're going to have the money market, which in the money market is going to determine the interest rates. And that's the one when we talked about liquidity trap before, it looks sort of like this. You're going to have a money demand curve and a money supply curve. These two, where they intersect, that determines whatever the current interest rate is. Then the other market is our goods and services market. This is the whole chapter previously, the aggregate supply, aggregate demand, right? So the money market determines interest rates. The aggregate supply, aggregate demand model determines the price level, which is basically inflation, and real gross domestic product, right? So how much stuff did we actually make? So John Maynard Keynes comes along, sees that we are in a recession, and he makes this link between changing the money supply and interest rates, and then eventually changing aggregate demand. So what John Maynard Keynes says, if you kind of go back to when we first talked about the aggregate supply curve, the book described the aggregate supply curve may be completely vertical. If it's completely vertical, like just a straight line up and down, then that means that no matter what the price level is, right? So if we have inflation, it doesn't matter. Whatever we're going to produce in an economy, because this is real GDP, how much stuff are we making? However much stuff we're making in an economy, that depends not on inflation, right? But it just basically depends on what our resources are, our land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. So if the government drops bags of money onto the street, that's not going to make us produce more stuff. John Maynard, that's if the aggregate supply curve is completely vertical. John Maynard Keynes actually thinks something differently. He believes in what we call like a kinked aggregate supply curve, right? So this is called a kinked aggregate supply curve. And then previously we've been basically mostly studying an aggregate supply curve that is upward sloping. And that was because of sticky prices. And so it was just saying that as prices go up, assuming that there are sticky wages, meaning that the price of a pen that I'm making goes up from $5 to $10. So I have a motive, as long as I have the people who work for me tied to a contract, to make more pens. Right? If the price level is going up, I'll want to produce more pens. So as the price level goes up, I want to make more stuff. Right? That's if we have sticky wages. So the price of the pen goes up, I can sell it for more, but my costs are constant. So at some point, though, you believe, or eventually the contractors will negotiate their wages, and you'll see the wages go up, which means my aggregate supply curve will shift back to the left. So that was in a previous chapter. So this chapter is really just coming back, circling back, talking about the aggregate supply curve, but now we're going to talk about the Keynes aggregate supply curve, which is kinked. And so what this means, you have your money market initially. This is, and the Federal Reserve sets this number here, the money supply, and they do that using monetary policy. And they're going to use it doing what we call easy monetary policy or expansionary monetary policy, right? And those are going to be what you learned previously, and this is just a review. You can either lower the discount rate, you can lower the required reserve ratio, or they can buy bonds. Remember when they buy bonds, buy makes supply bigger. So buy moves to the right, buy big, and then sell is to the left, sell shrink. So when the Fed buys bonds, so money supply curve is going to slide over to the right, which is going to cause interest rates to go down. John Maynard Keynes also pointed out there's an investment market, and he said that as interest rates go down, lower and lower, people are going to borrow more money in businesses. And when they do, then they're going to actually produce more things. And when they produce more things, that's going to cause the aggregate demand curve to shift to the right. So all this is telling you is that John Maynard Keynes believes that if we are currently producing 5 units, if the government increases the money supply, causes interest rates to fall, then we can see an increase in aggregate demand because businesses are going to invest more. All right, that's all he's saying here. That's his transmission mechanism, meaning how does it work? It's just a link from here to here to here. The only problem with that, and also I want to point out here, if you notice this curve here, so when we had that happen, we have here, the price level stayed exactly the same, meaning we have 0 inflation. When we had an aggregate supply curve that sloped up, we sort of had a trade-off. We can produce more stuff, but we might have some inflation. Here in his kink curve, what he's saying is at production lower than what our natural rate of production is, we can increase production, increase output without necessarily seeing an increase in the price level. However, once we get to this point here, all right, our maximum, When we do the same mechanism here, when we increase the money supply, when the aggregate demand curve moves from this point, like which is invisible here, to here, you're not going to increase more output. We can't make more stuff simply because people are demanding it, is what it's saying. And so what's going to happen is, in order to make more stuff, we're going to have to pay resources more. When we pay resources more, we're going to see an increase in our price level, right? So this is the John Maynard Keynes link. It's indirect, all right? It doesn't always hold, because this whole stuff here doesn't necessarily work, because what if interest rates don't affect investment? What if investment's completely vertical? Anytime you see something, a graph, and there's a vertical line here, it means that whatever's being measured on the bottom is not affected by interest, whatever's on the horizontal axis, the axis right here, right? So if investment does not depend on interest rates, nothing happens. Or this scenario could happen. If we have a money demand curve that's downward sloping, and at some point it's horizontal, right? So people are demanding money at high interest rates, right? I want to hold my money in bonds or some sort of interest-bearing account. Imagine if I could put $1 in the bank and I got 500% return, right? If that's the case, I would hold all my assets in the bank, right? I wouldn't actually want to hold currency. So this demand for money curve here, this is not how much money you want. This is how much of your assets are you willing to hold in non-interest bearing, right? Meaning like cash. Right? When I'm holding cash in my hand, I can't earn interest on it. So it makes sense. As the interest rate starts to fall, I'm okay with holding cash in my hand because the opportunity cost is very, very low. So the money demand curve slopes downward. Here's the money supply curve we had before. When we are in a horizontal portion here of the money demand curve, right? See how it's just a straight line? When the money supply curve shifts to the right because of expansionary, or what we call easy monetary policy, notice how the interest rates don't move. And if the interest rates don't move, this right here never happens. And if that never happens, the aggregate demand curve never moves ever. So with John Maynard Keynes, his biggest piece is you have to believe that the investment goods market is downward sloping. And you also have to believe that interest rates are going to fall, all right? And that the money demand curve is straight downward sloping and not necessarily shaped like this. And the problem is we don't know. All right, so to believe John Maynard Keynes' story, you have to go with these two assumptions. The monetarist, on the other hand, they believe it just happens automatically, meaning that the money supply increases, there's going to be an excess amount of money. What do you know? People are going to demand more stuff. When they demand more stuff, we'll get an increase in output, right? Businesses are going to produce more. At the same time, we're going to have a little trade-off here. We might have some inflation, right? So again, monetarists believe it is directly happens. Money supply increases, people have more money. Next thing you know, aggregate demand is going to shift to the right. So in talking about monetary policy, I wanted to kind of go over this list here. Monetary policy is just talking about the things that the Federal Reserve can do, right? And those three things are going to be manipulate the required reserve ratio, manipulate the discount rate, or buy and sell bonds. Remember in the monetary chapter, I believe you learned about the open market operations desk and buying and selling bonds. Right, so when you buy bonds, money supply is going to shift to the right. When you buy big, money supply gets bigger. When you sell, it shrinks. Make sure you go back to, and I just have the videos out here. This is just talking sort of about what happens in a recessionary gap. So know the difference between monetary policy. And remember, and there are also the videos you probably watched Dr. K's videos. Make sure also, I was just pulling this out because I wanted to pull the non-activists, they come up with a bunch of ideas. So activists like John Maynard Keynes say the federal government must do something. Non-activists say don't worry about it. Let's come up with some of these rules to figure out how the government is going to be involved in the economy. And one of them happened to be the Taylor Rule. And the Taylor Rule is basically just taking, using economic information, like we're in a recessionary gap. That's what I wanted to show you, all right? We're in a recessionary gap. All right, we know right here, this is a recessionary gap because we're to the left. We're currently producing 10 things when we really should be producing, let's say 15. And remember, this is the long run aggregate supply curve, which is how much stuff we could produce in the economy if we got down to our natural rate of unemployment. Right? So what the Taylor rule says is it says take this little gap here, right? Whatever the difference is here, your recessionary gap, multiply it by 0.5 plus 1 plus, let me give you an example of one, all right? So we take our little gap, whatever our gap happens to be, times 0.5 plus 1.5 times whatever our inflationary rate happens to be, right? And that will tell the government, the Federal Reserve, what they want to target the Fed funds rate at, right? And so this is a specific rule for the Federal Reserve Bank to use to determine what they want to target the rate at. And so what they'll do is they'll say, okay, we want to target it at 9.5, and then they'll buy and sell bonds to basically get that rate to 9.5%. Okay, does anybody have any questions about the Fed funds rate? And remember, the federal funds rate is the rate that, and a lot of people tend to get confused with this, there's a discount rate and a Fed funds rate. The Fed funds rate is the rate that banks charge to each other overnight, which is sort of crazy, but the Federal Reserve targets that rate, right? It can with the Taylor rule, as opposed, but the discount rate, the federal fund actually has control over. So the discount rate is how much banks loan the Federal Reserve, the provider of last resort, loans to banks overnight. The Fed funds rate is how much they loan to each other when they can't meet their required reserve ratios. All right, does anyone have any questions about chapter 15? All right, for monetary policy. Okay, so what I do want to point out then, and again, this is just my monetary people, 2301, you also have on here problem sets for class, all right? These are extra questions that Dr. K has set up. Let's see, what was this class right there one? Let me back out. Let me come to you here. Okay. First of all, you have your checklist. All right, your checklist are, you had one for chapter 1, exam 1, exam 2, exam 3. Pull that out and look at it before you start studying. So for this chapter, make sure before the exam or while you're studying or doing the homework, make sure you hit all of these, right? That way while you're studying, I might pull the, I know it's a lot of stuff, guys. All right, understand what monetary policy is, all right? This is just used to basically keep those goals, as far as the government's concerned. We want low unemployment, steady prices, and steady growth. The macro goals, right, here's price stability, high employment, stability of financial markets, and economic growth. Make sure you understand inflation, all right? Inflation, when they increase the money supply, according to the aggregate supply, aggregate demand model, if you go back here and let's say they increase the money supply, right? If we increase the money supply here, right, let's assume that the government stepped in, the transmission occurred, interest rates go down. This is a different graph. So this graph right here is talking about just what current looks like. This is what would happen if the government didn't do anything. And this last graph is what happens if the government did do some sort of expansionary or easy monetary policy, for example, like buying bonds, all right? We can increase, get our aggregate demand to increase, right? We can produce more stuff, but what's gonna happen is when we do that, we might see some inflation. And we know there's inflation because we had a price level of, let's say, 1. Now we're gonna have a price level, if you go over here, that's gonna be higher than 1, right, 2. And that means there's some sort of inflation. Because people, without any additional resources, right, with people want more stuff, it makes sense the price of things are gonna start to go up. That's the story that we're telling there. All right. As far as high unemployment, make sure you also notice that when you're looking at the aggregate supply, aggregate demand model, if we're currently here producing, not producing as much stuff, make sure you understand that means we have high unemployment. All right, and we have high unemployment because right here, this is our natural rate of unemployment. This would be if we didn't have any cyclical unemployment. Right, so if we are anywhere to the left of this, we have what we call cyclical unemployment, which means we are in a recession, anywhere to the left of that. On this end, it's going to be just the reverse. If we, let me give you an example right here. This is a graph of an economy in an expansionary gap, meaning that we're currently producing over our long run aggregate supply curve, which means that we might see some inflation, and the government needs to tighten monetary policy or have tight monetary policy. And what that's going to do is that's going to slow the economy down. It's going to reduce aggregate demand. And when they do that, and I'm talking about monetary policy, when the Federal Reserve sells bonds, right? When they sell bonds, they're going to go out into banks. And when they sell people bonds, people have to buy those bonds with cash. So I'm going to give, if I'm the Federal Reserve and you are the economy, right, public, I'm going to sell you bonds. If I sell you something, you're going to hand me cash, and I'm taking all the money out of the economy, right? That's right here. So what's going to happen is, and pretend this is S1, when I sell you bonds, I'm taking your money. When I take your money, there'll be less money in the economy, which means that the cost of borrowing money is going to go up, which means that businesses, if you believe in the investment piece, means that as the interest rate goes up, investment is going to go down, which means that if we talked before about the aggregate demand curve being C plus I plus G plus EX minus IM, you're going to see aggregate demand fall, right? And that's this graph right here. Economic growth, all right? And then I want to make sure you understand the difference between expansionary and contractionary monetary policy. If you get off this call and you don't understand that, please email me and we'll go over it again. Not a big deal, or send me a text or let me know, okay? And lastly, make sure, and this is what I was really kind of coming to, make sure you understand the Taylor rule, all right? Notice how it says this is very important. Do not be surprised if that question is on the exam. And the best thing to do is to write down Taylor rule is equal to 1.5 times inflation rate plus 0.5 times GDP gap plus 1. Do not forget the plus 1. All right, does anybody have any questions on my macro side? I got one more thing for you guys, okay? Make sure you also, and I'll send out another list for this, and I think it's helpful. You got the practice test, which is good. Also, we have these problem sets for class. Work on these, and if you have any questions about these, you can always do smart thinking. If you don't know what smart thinking is, email me or call me. You can, it's just a online tutoring session. All right. These are to get you thinking, all right? So when Congress established the Federal Reserve in 1913, what was its main responsibility when Congress brought in the Fed's responsibilities? All right? The Fed has 3 primary goals. Make sure that you understand what those are prior. Also on here, understand problems with inflation, right? And the reason that these are not multiple choice questions are these are the ones that are kind of get you thinking, all right? Also on here, there's also a practice problem, kind of towards the bottom. Right, that's going to ask you how to conduct open market operations, right? If we are at in a recessionary gap. Make sure you also understand for the exam. All right, well, let's go. All right, let me see. I would actually quiz you guys on this right now, except I got my micro people on here and I don't want to hold them up. For my macro people though, does anybody see a question that they want answered? Slowly. I think I kind of answered all these. I gave examples of monetary policy. I talked about the Fed uses the policy. Remember, the Fed is going to use the policy to achieve its macro goals. The macro goals are we want low unemployment, we want steady prices, and we want to see real GDP growing, economic growth. Right? This is important right here. All right, if the Fed orders expansionary monetary policy, describe what will happen to the following variables relative to what would happen without the policy. All right, if the Fed expansionary monetary policy, right? Expansionary monetary policy are those 3 things. And I think I may even have, in the book, there's a graph, all right? Make sure when you are writing your notes for this chapter, you have a table of expansionary monetary policy, fiscal policy. All right, make sure, macro people, understand this. All right, so I got monetary policy, which is set by the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve Bank does not set tax rates. Make sure you know that Janet Yellen, all right, is currently the head of the Federal Reserve Bank. She, along with others, make the decision about what's going to happen to interest rates. Those interest rates affect you. I mean, they affect you in the sense of your school loans. They also affect you, if you think about interest rates, affect inflation, right? And if she increases the money supply and there's inflation, that affects you because if you're borrowing money to go to school, that's an issue. Or if you have a job, imagine if your boss comes to you, he tells you, hey, I think you're doing a great job. I want to give you a 4% raise. All right, he gives you a 4% raise. But let's say that current inflation happens to be set at 6%. Right? This is important to you because what it's really telling you is your raise at 4% didn't necessarily keep up with inflation. Your buying power is actually less. Right? So you want to know what the Federal Reserve Bank is doing. And let's see, she throws cold water on Trump's economic plan. All right, feel free to read an article by her too. No, back. Then I'm going to go to, sorry. All right, so make sure you understand this. There's monetary policy and fiscal policy. It's either to get us out of a recession or to slow the economy down to kind of get rid of some inflation. So monetary side, they can increase the required reserve ratio, right? That's how much money that the banks lock up at night. They can buy treasuries, so buy big. That'll increase the money supply, or they can sell, shrink, and then they can manipulate the discount rate. So make sure you understand monetary policy. Break these into, does this either expand it or contract it? Does this expand it or contract it, expand it or contract it? On the other side, for the previous chapter, make sure you understand fiscal policy. This is all government spending and taxes. All right, my macro people, I'm gonna go ahead and unmute you all. Anybody on my macro side have any questions or wanna see any problems worked out? Anyone macro? Okay, macro guys, y'all want to drop off? Let me take a picture real quick. All right, so macro guys can already drop off. All right, micro people, anybody want to start off with any questions or want to see anything? Whether it be homework. Hold on, I got one question. Donata, take care. All right, my micro people, anyone have any specific questions they want to see or just do the same thing? All right, let's go with micro. All right, my micro guys, make sure you are also looking at these questions because these questions I noticed, they're on the exam. Also, oh, don't forget guys, you also have adaptive test prep. I didn't talk to my micro people about that. Anybody on here not scheduled their final exam? Make sure you've scheduled your final exam. All right, so let me switch over. And I'm going to, can I stop recording? I wanted to stop recording and then post it. All right. Let me figure this out. All right, micro guys. Your micro exam is coming up. What I want to tell you, so if you go into course content, let me just look and see what homework you have next. Does anybody know what homework you have next? Or what, I mean, sorry, what the due date is on the homework? Let me go to, I believe you have, all right, you have homework due on 11/20, correct? Which is tomorrow. You have chapter 6. Okay, chapter 6 as well. Make sure, and I think I sent this out in an announcement. Make sure today, before you get off this call, you understand Okay. Make sure for chapter 6, elasticity is such an interesting chapter, I think. All right. Make sure you understand the formula and do not kill yourself trying to memorize the formula. All right. Make sure that before the exam, I want you to write the formula down, cover it up. This is crazy. I want you to read the formula. I want you to cover it up with your hand. I want you to write it down, and then I want you to check to see if you got it right. Right. Or you can basically try to understand what elasticity is. I sent a video out. Please watch it. If you have a question about it, let me know, and I'll show you where the video is. Right, what I said in my announcements was, here, what you need to know before you start. At the very bottom here, I sent out 2 Khan Academy videos about elasticity of demand. Right? I'm not going to repeat them right now simply because they're already out there and they're excellent videos, and I really just don't want to waste my time. Right? But what I want you to realize most about elasticity, and I don't want to start this video here, right? But I do want to point out a couple of things. Let me go here. Oh, sorry. Elasticity. You know, of course I have mean profanity. Gosh, I'm afraid to look at this. Oh, if at increased prices, not many will buy. The elasticity is too damn high. All right, so elasticity is just measuring what's going to happen when there's an increase in the price, how much of a change there's going to be. And so at a high elasticity, meaning a high elasticity number, like a 3 or 4 or whatever, then that means that there's going to be what we call extremely elastic. Let me come here. Elasticity. Okay. So specifically here, I have a demand curve. Notice how the demand curve is downward sloping. Between A and B, there's going to be one elasticity. Between B and C, there's going to be another. C and E, F and D. All the way down, there's what we call elasticity. We studied earlier, there's a slope of a line, meaning the change in Y over the change in X. Elasticity is not measuring the slope. It's measuring a percentage change. So elasticity is going to change depending on where you are. Believe it or not, the elasticity between A and B is different from the elasticity between F and D, right? And right in the center of a line is what we would call unit elasticity. And what unit elasticity means, it means that at this point here, when we're talking about the elasticity of demand, is going to be equal to the number 1. So what that means is that for every 1% increase in price, you're going to see a 1% increase, for every 1% increase in price, there's going to be a 1% decrease in quantity demanded. Now with elasticity of demand, sign does not matter. And why I'm saying that, it means it doesn't matter if it is a positive number or a negative number, because elasticity is always negative. So I want you to, if you calculate elasticity, I want you to get the absolute value of it, which just means drop the sign, right? And if you drop the sign and the number is less than 1, right, 0.9, 0.8, 0.4, we're going to say that is inelastic demand, which means that a 1, like for example, let's say I had an elasticity of, let's say I had an elasticity of 0.5, all right? If I have an elasticity of 0.5, that means for every 1% increase in price, you're going to see a 0.5% decrease in quantity demanded, all right? So again, elasticity is just measuring how much of a change there is. So you already know what the law of demand says. As price goes up, people buy less. This chapter is talking about, well, how much less? There are excellent videos out on the internet, right? So, but I do want you to realize, I'm just going to kind of go over the elasticity review questions. Make sure for, let me pull this back up. I'm sorry. Can you share? All right. Let me start here. And oh, by the way, PED is just price elasticity of demand. Does anyone have any questions about any of these? Right? And again, I'm not going to do a lecture only because your lecture is what Dr. K has done. If you don't get that, you can come down here. And I was talking to someone the other day. He told me all he does is watch Dr. K's videos, and he's got like a want to say like an 85 in the class. All right, you've got to watch those videos. All right, and you also, first you have to read the chapters, then you watch the videos, take notes, then start on your homework. I know that's a lot of work, but guys, if you're already spending an hour and a half doing the homework, you might as well get something out of it that you can use for the test as opposed to just doing the homework. All right, so let me go back to elasticity. All right, let me unmute you all. Make sure I haven't talked over everybody. Does anybody have any questions about elasticity, either the video I sent out or about any of the homework problems?
No.
All right, cool. I'm going to go over the review. Okay. So if you haven't done the homework, it might be confusing, but for the review, make sure that you understand. Oh, that's my macro people. All right. So number one, a perfectly priced elastic demand curve will be blank. All right, perfectly elastic. What's kind of cool about elasticity? Let me go here. All right, per the book. Oh, sorry. All right, elasticity can either look, this is the market curve. Right, elasticity can either look like this, or it can look like terrible handwriting, like this. Right, the one on the right, this one here, when it's a straight vertical line, that means it's inelastic. Kind of looks like an eye. All right, what do you think is going to happen when the price changes? When I go from this price, let's say $1 to $4, what happens to how much I'm going to buy? And anyone can pipe in. The quicker you pipe in, the quicker this call will go. I'm going to unmute you all. All right, anybody want to answer that? What happens to the quantity demanded when the price goes from $1 to $4? Do I buy more or less? Or the same?
You buy less?
Right. When I went from $1 to $4, if my demand is completely inelastic, when it's $1, how much do I buy?
The same.
Huh? And when it goes to $4, how much do I buy?
The same amount.
Yeah, and so inelastic means I'm not very flexible. So think of elasticity as being like a rubber band, right? And if elasticity is inelastic, meaning it's less than 1, I'm not going to change how much I bought, which is different because if you go over here, and remember when we talked about price takers, back when we talked about the competitive market, and we said they're price takers, they have what we call an elastic demand. So when, let's say if the price were, let's say $2, if they want to sell their product at exactly $2.01, all right, $2.01, they're not going to sell anything. They're going to have 0. All right, so elastic means you're very responsive to a change. Now, truthfully, nothing is ever perfectly inelastic. Nothing is ever perfectly elastic. Most demand curves, as you know, let me see, clear? Look more like this. All right, so I have one that looks like this. I have one that looks like, sorry guys, I know I always tell you, all right, let's say I'm gonna make one really, really elastic, all right, which means it's gonna be very, very flat, right? Flat is another word for elastic for me. All right, so assuming that there was a price change from here to here, all right, on both, let's say these are just 2 different goods, same prices, same difference in price change. When I drop my price this from here to here, notice what happens if you were to read the graph. What happens, guys, I apologize. I don't have my little mouse thing. All right, but the point I'm trying to make here is, if you look at the graph on the right and the graph on the left, look at this. The more elastic something is, the bigger the price change is going to be. All right, which means also the elasticity number is going to be greater than 1. When something is inelastic, elasticity is going to be less than 1. And again, we're talking about absolute value. And if you notice, not much of a change. So if you were selling something, a good, would you rather sell a good that's more elastic or more inelastic?
More elastic.
right? If it's more elastic, what's going to happen if I raise my price? Am I going to lose a lot of sales or a little bit of sales?
Just
Right?
a little.
Well, hold on. When I go from here to here, is this change a big change or a little change compared to this change over here? Let's say this is at $1, I sell X units, and at $2, I sell here. Let's make that $1. Now let's make this $2. These look like awful graphs. All right. When I go from $1 to $2, do I lose a lot of stuff, a lot of sales, or a little bit of sales? All right, a lot of sale or a little bit of sale. This number here is, let's say, 15. This number is 5. This number here is 15. Much better when I put numbers in. This number here is 12. So when I raise my price from $1 to $2, how much do I lose in sales right here?
Just $3.
Well, not necessarily $3. I'm going to go from $1 to $2. Oh, what do you think? And then I'm going to lose, how many am I going to sell? I used to sell 15. I'm only selling 5 now. Right?
Mm-hmm.
I lost now the percentage change is the same here, right? The percentage change between $1 and $2 is the same on both of them. The quantity, the change in how much was lost, or the change in quantity demanded, is big, much bigger over here. So when there is an elastic demand, when you raise your price, right, you're going to see a larger decrease in how many you sell, which is different because when you have an inelastic demand, and things that are inelastic, the book talks about, there are different reasons for things to be inelastic. It can be inelastic because simply you have to have them, right? And there aren't many good substitutes for them. For example, cigarettes, alcohol, you'll find that those goods have a more inelastic demand. They look more like an eye. So it means that when the price goes up, my quantity demanded at the bottom doesn't change by much. The price doubles, I don't care. Here, the price doubles, I'm not going to buy it anymore. I used to buy 15, now I'm buying 5. Maybe I've substituted and I'm buying something else, because over here in this market, let's say this were the market for Coca-Cola. I could buy a Coke for $1. I can now buy it for $2. I used to buy 15 a week. Now I'm going to buy 5 a week. You know why? Because now I've switched over to Gatorade, or I switched to Pepsi. Over here, a little bit different. I buy cigarettes. They went from $1 to $2. I might cut back on how much I smoke, but not by very much. So that's the whole concept of elasticity and inelasticity. And I can't stress to you, this video, I think it's like less than 6 minutes, explains it to a T. And I think I might even play it. But I think if I play it in here, it's going to mess y'all up. But I do want you to watch it. Let me see if I can try to get it to play. Hold on. I think I can. I'm just not sure what it does with the sound. Hold on. There you go. So in here, he's got all his points, the price and the quantity at each. So all he's done is graph this line. So at a price of 9, people are going to demand 2 units. At a price of 8, people are going to demand 4 units. At a price of $5.50, people are going to demand 9 units, et cetera, et cetera. And he's going to show you how the elasticity changes between the points. And he's going to use what we call the midpoint formula. And do not get bogged down when you look at that formula. It looks kind of heavy, but just remember all it is, it's the change between 2 prices divided by the 2 prices added divided by 2. That's it. So it's not necessarily the change in price, it's the percentage change in price. And the reason, there's a reason why we use the midpoint formula, but all it's doing is just saying, take the change, the difference between the two, and divide it by the two of them divided by 2. And that's going to tell you how much of a percentage change there is. So you're going to do that for price. You're also going to do that for quantity. And then you're going to calculate elasticity. And that's going to be a change in price. I'm changing quantity of demanded over a change in price. But most importantly, what I really want y'all to get from this call today is, what does that mean? It means when I raise my prices by 1%, I'm going to lose 3% in quantity demanded. And I'm not going to lose 3 in the sense I'm going to sell 3 less. Whatever the quantity demanded was before, it's going to be 3% lower. So again, this is a percentage change. How does a change in price affect or impact quantity demanded? Sorry. And this is that whole idea from Biggest Loser. They don't tell you this guy lost 10 pounds and this person lost 6 pounds. They do a percentage change so you can compare things. Guys, if you don't mind, go ahead and calculate these numbers out with him in your notes. That way you'll at least have done 2 examples. And there's, of course, going to be one on the exam. One point five. Okay, does anybody have any questions about that video? Let me unmute you all. Okay, yeah. Oh, sorry. All right. Anybody have any questions? So now everybody should understand how to calculate elasticity. Notice up in this region here, at the upper portion of a curve, the elasticity is always going to be more elastic, meaning it's going to be greater than 1. All right, so this video is really showing you how to calculate elasticity. Next video kind of talks about what is elasticity, all right? Make sure you understand that at the unit area here, the middle point, that's always going to be 1. And then down here, you're going to find more inelastic. So elastic, more inelastic. Other thing I want to point out for the exam, and I would go over these, I just don't think it would be useful to you if I go over these questions here. I think it kind of helps after you kind of read the chapter. Go through here, and I think there's only, if I'm correct, go through elasticity here, but I do want to point out, if I can find it, I wanted to point out, I'm trying to find a problem. The reason that this is even important to you is if you ever start a business, right, and you're trying to decide where you're going to price your product, you got to know what the demand is. Meaning, right, is it an elastic demand, meaning I change my price, I'm going to have a huge drop off in quantity demanded? Or is it more inelastic? If I raise my price, I might not lose anything. There's a link between elasticity and profit, right? And total revenue. And so firms are concerned about elasticity specifically for this reason. And the reason we know this is because lots of economists have gotten data and they found out that when you are operating in the elastic portion of a demand curve, if you raise the price, you're going to see your revenue fall, right? Meaning that there's going to be, as I raise the price, I'm going to lose some sales because I face a downward sloping demand curve, which means my total revenue is going to get lower. When I'm operating here, am I inelastic? This area over here, when you happen to have elasticity that's more inelastic or less than 1, when I raise my price from here to here, I'm not going to lose revenue. I might even make more money because the price will actually change there, right? And so that's why you want to be concerned with that. And that's sort of at the end of the chapter. Let me take y'all off mute. Take you off mute, Diary. Yeah, I unmuted everyone. Did anyone have any questions about elasticity or want to see any of the homework problems worked out? All right. So again, last thing, go back through those elasticity questions. If you have anything, let me know. Other than that, I'll go ahead and let you all drop off the call. And if you have if you have not registered for the final, please do so. All right, guys, take care. Have a good weekend. Oh, actually, have a good holiday. Enjoy yourselves. Bye.
Bye.